This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Episode 315 for July 29th, 2018. Welcome to the Summer Serial, where each week we present an installment of the serialized novella Presumed Dead by Rick Kennett, adapted for Cast of Wonders from the novel self-published in 2016. We continue now with Presumed Dead, Part 2. Presumed Dead by Rick Kennett, narrated by Marguerite Kenner. Part 2. Chapter 3. Half stumbling, almost tumbling, she made her way down the slope to the plain. The need for shelter and overwhelming curiosity had replaced the urgings of caution. The first wreck she came to was little more than a collapse of iron plates, with only a suggestion of a hull shape. A small steamer with a compact superstructure and squat hull offered a dry but debris-strewn interior. Sections of both sides were crushed in, twisted hull plates making seemingly deliberate spikes of malice within. Cy wanted shelter, but not at the risk of cutting herself in half. The next wreck was more intact, but too close to a swiftly running stream, which she regarded with a feeling bordering on horror. She was Martian enough to know the constant sight and sound of all that water just flowing away, uncontained, would be too disturbing. Out of sight and sound of that maddening water, she found another freighter, somewhat larger and sporting little damage apart from a gaping hole in the starboard side. Into this she climbed, into a kind of dry twilight. Coming out of the rain was one of the best feelings she'd ever had, certainly the best she could remember right now. Each cabin was empty, barren of furniture or fittings, smelling slightly of damp. Without thinking why she did so, she chose what had most likely been the captain's cabin, directly under the bridge. Then for 2 days, as the rain stopped and started, she slept, peaceful and dry, waking occasionally to eat and go for short exploratory walks around her ship and outside. A couple of times she tried to talk to the big black spiders that crawled over her as she lay in her backpack, now stretched out to a sleeping bag. Her only answer was a glare of irritation with their stalked eyes as if to say, "Are you still here?" On the morning of the third day, the rain ceased, and Cy took herself up to the bridge of the wreck. From there she watched the last of that long storm sweep off to the southeast. The sky was coming up a pale, washed-out blue, as if scrubbed colorless by the rain. Blue skies always struck her as strange. Martian skies were pink-brown. The scattered wrecks took on solidarity in the strengthening light, their long morning shadows pushing out across the yellow-gray plain. She took in deep breaths and had a passing fancy of sea air, something she'd experienced only once before during a brief visit to an ocean world. No dizziness, no more breathing. It was amazing, she reflected, what the human body was capable of doing for itself with a minimum of medication and a maximum of rest. That sounds like something Dr. Norsk might say, Cy thought and laughed aloud. Putting on an ancient, cracked voice, she said, "Young de Gert is coming along nicely. It's astonishing what the human body is capable of doing for itself with a minimum of medication and a maximum of rest." For a moment she pictured the compact sickbay of her frigate Utopia plane, the only sickbay in a Martian warship decorated with frescoes of Terran landscapes, forests and lakes and rolling green hills. But then Dr. Ben Norsk was the only Earth person in an otherwise all-Martian crew. He was also the oldest at 103, while Cy had been the youngest at 17. Down towards the bows of the wreck, Joss, forever 16, stood amid spilled anchor chain, staring up at her. For the first time in days, she ignored the ghost, thinking instead and with a touch of sadness of Utopia Plain, and how her captain and the doctor would be mourning her supposed death. She hated this twinge of guilt she felt at deceiving them, but it had to be done. Captain Brown would get over it. A scraping noise heralded a black furry ball forcing its way out of the flared mouth of one of the bridge voice pipes beside the immovable steel wheel of the steering position. As the furry ball pushed out further, 8 thin legs unfolded from its sides. A moment more and the spider emerged, flipping out its legs, its eye stalks whipping up into place to blink at Cy before plopping softly to the deck. "And good morning to you too, Krennig," she said, watching the creature scuttle officiously across the deck on its spidery business. There was, she thought, a certain self-importance, a sort of purposefulness in the comings and goings of the creatures that had prompted her to dub them Krennigs, after an officious drill sergeant, instigator of 100 orientating classes and route marches across the plains of Mars for her Gartino cadet group. Old Get It Right, they'd call Krennig behind his back, and he doubtless knew it. The spiders themselves were innocuous enough if not disturbed, but it puzzled Cy that she'd yet to see any of them eat or hunt. Not that there was anything for them to eat or hunt. Yellow dirt and stunted saltbush, no other insects, no animal life at all. She swung herself off the bridge, sliding down the ladder and onto the deck with a thump of bare feet, skipping down a steep companionway. Only the upper spaces of the ship were accessible. Everything below decks disappeared into hard-packed silt. The hatchways were like human hatchways. The bare and empty cabins and spaces were like human cabins and spaces. The shapes of things pointed to the crews and builders of these vessels being humanoid. Nothing gave any indication as to who these people had been, where they went, or what happened. Long ago, ships had sunk. Long ago, a sea had vanished. That, for the sake of what mental health she still retained, was as far as Cy was willing to ponder. Questions, like the lower works of the ships, disappeared into mystery. Emerging from the shadows of the hole in the hull, into bright morning light, Cy stepped down onto the yellow-gray soil of the plain. Some little distance away ran the stream that had disturbed her 2 days earlier. She made for it now almost without a qualm. Like the rain that once enchanted her had long since lost its magic, so 17 years of environmental conditioning, horrified at a stream of water running away to nowhere, had been numbed from a mad shriek to a vague uneasiness. "Where are you going?" Joss asked her, falling into step. "To wash. These fatigues are self-cleaning, but I'm not." "You really haven't thought this through. Your fatigues won't last forever. They're not meant to last more than a few weeks. What are you going to do for clothes in this new life of yours? No animals on this planet, so no furs or skins." "Good. I'm no killer. Not anymore." Cy broke into a jog, pushing a finger down the seam of her tunic, slitting the airtight seal. She smelt old sweat. "What native plants can you use for fabric?" said Joss, keeping pace beside her. "Do you know how to weave? Can you knit? Can you even sew?" "I don't care." Cy discarded her tunic, flicking off her bra with dexterous thumbs. "You're the grasshopper, Cy, and there'll be no ants to take pity on you when winter comes. What are you yammering about?" Grasshopper? Ants? Vague memories of childhood fables. She opened the fastening of her pants, skipping out of them and splashed naked into the shallows of the stream, sharp and cold against ankles, knees, hips, into the water. She dived, and suddenly she was back aboard the shuttle with the sea roaring in her ears, the craft sinking, taking her down. With a gasp, Cy thrust her head above the water and clawed her way back to the shallows, assaulted by too many bad memories. The pain in her head, the slow drift up from black oblivion, the light of an alien noon brightening in her soft helmet visor, A moment of panic as she broke surface, her arms flailing, hitting the raft ejected from the shuttle as it sank. She couldn't swim, but the buoyancy of the stream was much the same as floating in freefall. Ducking under again, coming up almost immediately, pushing gently against the slow current, always careful to have her feet in contact with the bottom. Her whole body exhilarated at this immersion in water, another reason not to go back to a world where water was rationed in eyedroppers and treated more preciously than Sunheart jewels born in supernova. Relaxed and contented for the first time and she didn't know how long, Sai climbed out and sat on the ground, letting the warmth of the newly risen sun dry her. For a few moments she gazed at all the dead ships around her. Then for a change she watched the stream easing by silver in the morning light. I could very quickly get used to too much water. Yes, indeed. She ran fingers through her short black hair, wet and unruly, and wished she had a comb. A comb and a mirror. Those, she decided, were the only things she missed from her previous life. More than rank? Yes. More than space travel? Yes. More than the genetically acquired ability to strike with precision against a hideous enemy? Yes. Leaning out over the bank, Sai looked at her image in the water. The eyes didn't seem right. Hard, staring eyes that had seen too much of space and too much death too soon. The eyes of a young woman grown suddenly old. Padding back to where she'd tossed her clothes, she found they'd disappeared. Suspecting an act of spite by the dead, she blamed Joss, then saw how impossible that was. 2 seconds later, she spotted her things crawling off through the salt bush 100 meters away. Chasing her escaping clothes, she discovered a convoy of Krennic spiders, carrying them balanced on their furry backs. 3 groups of 4, each group forming a diamond shape, carried a single garment as they filed along in measured 8-legged step due west. Sai darted in, snatched up her tunic and pants, then retreated a few steps to see what would happen. The 2 groups of spiders deprived of their cargo abruptly dispersed, scuttling off into the bushes, into wrecks, or into the distance. The group carrying her bra continued on, apparently oblivious to what had happened to their fellows. She dressed while following them, sacrificing her bra to curiosity. In free fall, it kept her B-cup breasts in place. Down on the ground, she could live without it. The spiders marched on, their legs rippling in unison in an almost hypnotic fashion. The landscape was less abrupt than the plains of Mars, which was jagged with craters and volcanic ejecta. Here it was clean, as if sieved and sieved again. It undulated at places, making sweeping rises and slopes. It ridged gently into petrified waves and ramps to nowhere. Yellow-gray sand, saltbush, and the funnels and cantered masts of the enigmatic wrecks. Some of the more distant wrecks shimmered in a morning heat haze. The wind picked up and sang an eerie note through the empty bridge windows of one of the ships as Sai and the spiders passed. It sounded like a ghost. It sounded like air ripping out of the ruptured hull of a crippled shuttle. It sounded like this whole vast plane had found a voice and was telling her something she could not understand. She gave the wreck a long sideways glance, hoping not to see watching figures on its deck or faces pressed to its portholes. No figures, but those portholes, those windows like watching eyes, were everywhere and all around. Soon they were climbing the rising ground leading to the hills bracketing the plain to the west. A few minutes later, the spider stopped and with clicking claws threw her bra into an oblong hole. Immediately afterwards, they crawled off back towards the wrecks, separating as they went. The hole was long and wide and about 4 meters deep, a giant's grave, though no dead colossus lay within. Her bra sat atop a pile of dead saltbush and scraps of mushroom tree. A refuse pit? Sai looked about. No other Krennics were approaching. She sat down to wait. Joss, in her blue and white vacuum suit, sat down to wait with her. "You were thinking just now of how the captain would be mourning you. Dr. Norsk, too. Funny you never thought of your father." Cy eyed the ghost sideways, thinking how sweet it would be to push her into the pit, hating what she was thinking, but thinking it all the same. "I was waiting for you to come around to this," she said. "Though it might be more along the lines of, what if you came home and one day found a big, hairy, sweaty xenoid gloop forcing its attentions on your father, but you've come round to it anyway. My father, my mother too, when she was alive, knew what they were getting into by bringing a modified child into being for a predetermined purpose." "That's besides the point, Cy. Your father loves you regardless of your origins, your brothers too. And I love them. We're one big, happy family, now lacking a mother figure who sent me off to war before I was even born." "Why are you giving your father such pain?" "I am not my father's daughter." "Yes, you are. You're a daughter, a sister, even an aunt. They'll get over it. Before I was conceived, my parents knew there was a good chance they'd lose me. C'est la guerre, Josephine." "But they haven't lost you. You're still alive." "And you're not," said Cy. She jumped up and stalked off. Halfway back to her wreck, she heard a thin, faint concussion beat down from high above like whispered thunder. Starting almost directly over her head, something began etching a thin, bluish-white line through the sky. A ship, she thought, and all at once there was Joss dancing out ahead of her, waving her arms and shouting, "Down here! I'm down here!" Cy watched her with a vague sense of betrayal, then stared up again, conscious of her position in the open, cursing herself for not having long ago cut out the locator chip implanted behind her ear. "They'll detect me. They'll see me. They'll find—" In a confusion of relief and fear, she realized what it was. She'd heard concussions like that before, seen a similar bluish-white line scratch itself across another world's sky. And Joss faded away in mid-leap. 3 months ago, shore leave, a day after a prolonged fleet action with Xenoid forces, some of Utopia Plane's crew were relaxing at an outdoor cafe on a coalition base, 4th world of the newly won star system. At the first thin noise in the sky, Cy looked up, a cup of dark arabesque coffee held halfway to her lips. Captain Brown barely glanced up as the sky opened a bluish-white slit in the east. "Xenoid escape capsules," he'd said, eating beans and rice. "How can you tell?" she'd asked, watching the line stretch and curve into the north. "The color. Something in the makeup of their heat shield causes it to streak blue-white when it hits an oxygen atmosphere." "So some gloop thinks it's having a happy landing after losing its ship," muttered Lieutenant Frank Peters, the ship's second officer. "Poor devil," said the captain. "Sir, it's a gloop." "Poor devil all the same." About a kilometer away on the tarmac, 2 marine heliofoils lifted silently into the air like big gray praying mantises and began a gentle acceleration into the north. Cy watched them over the rim of her coffee cup until they abruptly changed camouflage to a mottled blue-green and vanished against the sky. No one around the tables spoke or moved. Lighting in the north, seconds later, the thud of blunt thunder. Frank Peters wet his finger and marked an invisible scoreboard. "By the way, Cy," the captain said, bringing everyone's attention back to the table, "that was some damn fine shooting yesterday. You probably earned Utopia Plane another citation. Well done." Cy smiled and blushed. "If the ship's awarded a citation, Ralph, it's because the ship earned it. We're a team." She sipped dark arabesque. All very well back then to be so at ease, she thought. What she felt now was unease as she watched this other thin blue-white line bloom westward across the sky. West, where falls the enemy. West, where lies the Charlie Sierra cairn. The air conditioning in the dissection lab struggles against the smell of burnt fat and decay. The Gartino class sitting on raised benches around the slab watches impassively as the large, furry lump is worked on by their xenobiology instructor, wielding his molecular scalpel with deceptive ease. Jelly layers are folded back, exposing the intricate traceries of the being's hydraulic system. The limbs work by fluids pumped through a network of veins, says the instructor, pointing. The legs can change in an instant from stumpy elephant feet to long slits. The arms can be as thick and as strong as girders, and in the next second thin and whip-like. Xenoids are things without bones. There was a xenoid with her now on this planet. A thing without bones. A thing to hate. Sai thought through her options. There were other survival cairns in safer directions, but at greater distances. Could she reach them with the supplies she had? Doubtful. Could she still go west and dodge this gloop? It was a big enough planet, though she'd heard xenoids could sense human blood from afar. Perhaps not. But what if the rumors were true? What if it came stilting over the horizon one night? Maybe this night, reeking its stale, burnt fat smell, blocking out the stars, howling and whistling. What if she topped a hill one day and ran straight into the monster, all hairy jelly? Perhaps the planet wasn't so big after all. The sinister bluish-white line faded into the west, leaving her with the certainty it was a problem she'd hoped had been left in space many days ago. Right now it was time to worry about extracting the locator chip from behind her ear. The next intruder in her sky might not be a nightmare incarnate. It might be human. The walk back to her freighter was filled again with the same sense of being observed from every broken deck and blind porthole she passed. The wind blew warm and steady from the southeast. Occasionally, an opening or piece of jagged metal caught it and cried that same mournful note. When she arrived back at her own wreck, she was surprised to see her stuff just where she'd left it, sitting in the middle of the cabin below the bridge. She'd half expected it to be bobbing its way on spiderback towards the oblong pit. But here were her food packs, canteens, laser, and boots, the medikit and the molecular scalpel, and her backpack stretched out into a sleeping bag. Nothing had been touched. But then the Krennigs hadn't taken much notice of her since that one beyond the ridge had nipped her hand. Doubtless a frontier guard. Sitting cross-legged on the deck, she picked up the molecular scalpel, rubbing a thumb across its blade. It would part her skin and the flesh beneath without blood. It would extract the locator chip effortlessly, painlessly. But once the locator chip was cut out, she didn't have the implements to replace it. Once she removed it, she might as well use the scalpel to carve deserter into her forehead. Not that it mattered. Best do it now. If the Coalition forces were to win the Battle of Beta Electra and ships be spared from active defense, they'd be certain to launch a system-wide search for their missing shuttle. And even if they didn't win and Beta Electra was overrun by the enemy, she knew they'd still make the effort one day. Now. It had to be now. Then she would disappear, and humanity would know her no more. She pushed the scalpel up behind her ear. The cabin dimmed as something blocked one of the two portals. Joss's face pressed close to the glass, watching her. The eyes were wide and red, her lips parted in eager anticipation, her auburn hair flung out and wild in a silently shrieking wind. The specter's whole expression, wide eyes and turned-up mouth, was, "Do it! Do it! Do it!" Sai stared back at the face, for the first time fearing the ghost. For an insane moment she was sure this was not the same pushing, bullying specter of the mind that had followed her since the raft, but an evil entity from some spiritual outer darkness, mocking her with a beloved likeness. The scalpel dropped from her hand. Her eyes met the face at the glass. The face continued to stare, to take on tints of green about the taut features, to part its lips in a malign grin, to part a bit more and a bit more and a bit more until Sai was sure it was going to rip across with a hideous tearing sound, becoming a gulf of darkness out of which would wail that mournful, wind-borne cry that haunted the plain. She flew at the portal, flinging her fists against the glass. The ghost laughed a wicked cackle, with a mouth open too wide. Sai raced up on deck, rushing into blinding sunlight where laughter echoed across the plain. She gripped the railing all corroded and looked down the side of the ship. Joss was not there. No, Joss was behind her, hands on hips, grinning and naked, bleeding from slowly fissuring rents in her head and body. She said, "See me as I am, Sai. See me as I am." Sai closed her eyes, covering them with her hands, her final vision of Joss a mess of seeping red lines crisscrossing, spreading and meeting, breaking her into pieces. She could smell cold vacuum, and for an instant was back in the asteroid belt, back in her little scouter shaped like an egg, fragile as an egg, hammered with rocks. "I'm coming for you, Sai," said the darkness behind her hands. "No." "I'm creeping towards you, my love." Sai charged forward, yelling, eyes still covered. A dull concussion, a thick spray of sticky warmth, the sensation of being hit with chunks of cold meat, in the body, in the face, in the mouth. She gained the companionway, jumping the steps 3 at a time in her blind downward run. Something caught her calf. She tumbled, sure it was a hand, sure it was a dead girl's hand. Balling herself up instinctively, she rolled. At the bottom, on her feet again, she belted along a corridor, gasping, stumbling around corners, with something at her back. She slammed the heavy hatch behind her as if it were the lightest of plywood, upended a canteen over her head, rubbing water into her hair and face, swigged, swilled, spat, threw off her bloodied clothes as if they were aflame, huddled into an angle of the room, laser snatched up, swung at portals, at the door, all around. No one peered in through the glass. Nothing entered at the door. For many minutes she stayed like that, her aching back and shoulders to the wall, bloodied knees under her chin, eyes sighting along the gun barrel, wet, scared, shivering, hurting. Any moment now the red jigsaw horror would come stalking in. The sun shone brightly through the portals. The wind gusted once against the wreck and was still. Presently her nerve returned. She let her gaze slip to the floor where her clothes lay in a shaft of portal sunlight. Inching out from the wall, she nudged them with a toe. They were clean. Still shaky, she tended her bruises and grazes, then dressed. While pulling on her boots, she found the molecular scalpel lying forgotten on the deck. She laid it aside. Later. She'd do it later. Sai spent the better part of the night not sleeping, and part of the following morning sitting by the single porthole of her cabin, staring out at the plain, thinking of Joss. She'd been a second-year Martian Star Corps cadet when Sai met her in an astrogation class, though this had not been their first meeting. They'd looked at each other that first scholastic morning with, "Were you at?" and "Didn't I meet you when?" expressions, because no Martian forgets the day they perform the touching Mars ritual, nor who they run with. They run the ritual 5 at a time. Silene, an auburn-haired girl, and 3 boys are in the airlock together. They wear gym clothes but are barefooted. Their breathing, deep and slow, hyperventilating to flush their bloodstreams with oxygen, is the only sound. Each 12-year-old is tense, excited, full of pleasurable anticipation and just a little scared. But for their breathing, they are quiet. They watch the column of lights against the outer door, indicating pressure dropping fast. They can feel it in their ears, behind their eyes. Gooseflesh stands out on arms and legs. It's cold in the airlock, hovering near zero so as to equalize with the temperature of the high summer day outside. No one is forcing any of them to do this. Too late to back out now, but no one is pushing her into it. Not Sergeant Krennig, not Father, not anyone. Sai's running the ritual to show she's a Martian as well as a Spud. To let the planet embrace her, get its sand between her toes, feel it against her skin, to go face naked into Mars. She feels her eyes bulge, her left ear ache. She remembers silly stories of eyes popping out, of bodies exploding. She believes none of them. She doesn't want to. The sign flashes stand by. They expel their breath as they've been told, so to avoid lung damage. The outer door flies open. 5 children dash out into a 1/100th atmosphere of carbon dioxide, their blood streams oxygenated. Out across the sand, powdery stuff, fine underfoot, their skin tingling and cold. They make for the other building in long, bounding steps, running leaps towards the other airlock, the ritual's regulation 10-meter distance away. Everything is red sand and breathlessness. That and ear-aching silence. Sai doesn't see the space-suited shepherds either side, hardly notices the blurred figures running with her. The airlock is gained. 5 silent runners fling themselves inside. The door slides shut. Cold air, warming, hisses in, returning sound, followed by 5 gasping mouths and noses, gasping for air, greedy for air. 5 babbling, laughing, screaming, we did it, 12-year-olds, jumping, hugging, having touched Mars with their bare hands and feet. A couple are clutching trophies of sand in their fists. Sai is grasping the auburn-haired girl and exclaiming, "Let's do it again!" So they'd met again 3 years later in that astrogation class and struck up an instant rapport. Their friendship deepened over time, and later neither could remember who kissed who first. Noon. Sai stepped out through the hole in the freighter's starboard side and paused to look around. Nothing moved except saltbush branches in the wind. The hills in the west appeared to float in a blue haze. Distant wrecks shimmered as thermal rollers rippled across the plain. Satisfied nothing was about to assail her, she set out for the oblong pit at the foot of the western hills. If she was going to live on this world, she wanted to come to terms with some of its mysteries, even if it meant staying on the plane another day or two, though she felt fit enough now to leave. If she was sparse with her rations, she could stretch her time here among the wrecks and still reach the Charlie Sierra cairn without starving. By then, any xenoid that had landed in that pod ship might be dead of its own starvation, sickness, or injuries. Well, maybe. In one of her pockets was the longest roll of bandages she could find in her med kit. In her backpack were 2 lengths of rusty iron lasered off the deck railing 10 minutes earlier and still warm to the touch. The laser pistol itself rusted in an inside pocket of her tunic. Not exactly quick draw to Gertch, not that it mattered. She was sure she'd smell a gloop before seeing it. Arriving at the pit, Sai hammered one of the iron bars into the ground with the other bar, tied one end of the long bandage to it, and tugged several times to make sure it was secure. Throwing the other end into the pit, Sai rappelled down 4 meters of smooth side into the cool, dim shadows, stooped, and retrieved her bra. A quick look about the floor of the pit, at the dead saltbush and scraps of mushroom tree, confirmed her idea that it was a refuse hole. This plain of shipwrecks was being kept obsessively clean of all extraneous material by the spiders. As she was pondering this oddity, a trickle of rust tickled the back of her neck. Looking up, she was just in time to glimpse spider claws and be hit by falling dirt and rotting vegetation. "Froob!" she exclaimed. She wiped dust from her eyes, grimacing. Then, seeing the funny side of it, she chuckled. She'd been hit with the equivalent of a pie in the face, losing all sense of dignity, and had said "froob" like a kid. She said it to an alien bug. who didn't know any better. Deep inside a cesspit, she began to laugh, first at her situation, then at herself and all her future plans. She laughed and laughed, then abruptly swallowed it in one huge gulp and was suddenly sober. There'd been a metallic sound from above. She listened and it came again, the sound of claws scraping on the iron spike, anchoring her bandage climbing line. The line began to wiggle. "Stop it!" she yelled, jumping up. The scraping and wiggling continued. "Stop!" She pulled her laser, fired into the lip of the pit, sending hot dirt spraying back onto her. The scraping and wiggling paused a second, then continued. Before she even knew what she was doing, the other iron bar was in her right hand, hefting against her palm. A moment of white light in her head, numbers denoting mass, force, trajectory, flashed by in her mind's eye. Then the iron was away, Sai watching it go with her arms still outflung as if reaching to bring it back. It cleared the edge of the hole, up and up, arced, plunged to one side, and disappeared from sight with a wet crunch. The line stopped wiggling. She grabbed it, checked that it still held, and began climbing using feet and knees, hands only to steady herself as Sergeant Krennig, old get it right, had taught her. The scene at the top was ugly. A skewered spider lay motionless, seeping yellow ooze where the plump abdomen was pierced through, its 8 legs folded under, eye stalks collapsed, claws clenched about the anchor spike it had been trying to dislodge. "Oh, you silly creature," said Sai to the little corpse. She brushed its fur, ruffling in the wind, and was engulfed by a great sadness. But only part of what she felt was for the spider. Mostly it was for herself. After all she'd done and planned, and after all those arguments with Joss Manxman, she could still kill instantly and effectively, whether it be with a starship's weapons system or a piece of iron. She expected to see Joss appear and throw her words of that morning back at her. "I'm no killer, not anymore." Joss did not appear. Neither did any Krennigs come scuttling in, aghast at the murder, claws clicking for revenge. Not that it was murder, she told herself. They weren't sentient, only bugs, and alien bugs at that. Likewise, it wasn't a conscious attempt to hide the evidence when she unspiked her victim and placed it in her backpack. She wanted it for examination, yes, and when she scuffed any spilled bodily fluids into the dirt with her boots, that wasn't destroying evidence. Inbred sense of neatness and order, that was all. As these rationalizations formulated themselves, another spider crawled by with a load of neatly cut-up saltbush on its back. Sai watched it approach, but it made no sign that it was aware of her crime, that it was aware of her at all. It tipped its load into the pit, turned, and crawled off. As she returned to her freighter, she sensed more than ever a growing air of watchfulness about the plane. This feeling came creeping, though nothing was seen and nothing moved along that sprawl of impossible shipwrecks. Too many places for things to hide, too many concealing corners and watching windows and decks above eye level to look down from. In this vast expanse and array of dead vessels, the stillness was dishonest. She boarded one of the vessels, scrambling in through a hull breach to convince herself no watchers lurked within. As with her own wreck, the interior was devoid of any real detail, ladders and companionways disappearing into hard-packed yellow ground. She climbed to the bridge, devoid of instruments or equipment save for voice pipes and an immovable wheel, and crossed to the starboard wing. "Hello!" Her shout echoed out across the plain, and nothing answered save the wind keening through the empty window frames, sounding sometimes like lost voices, and sometimes like weeping, but hardly ever like the wind. "Hello!" she called again, and the wind dropped and was still. Standing there alone in this immense, deliberate silence, It came to her that she was the plaything of unseen forces, a puppet, passive and unimportant. "Play your games, then," she said to nobody in particular, a raised voice in the silence. "I'll show you how unimportant I am." She ran down the bridge ladder to the deck and with a violent twist ratcheted the knurled metal ring on her laser pistol's barrel to full. She squeezed the firing stud. The pistol blazed a wide beam into the rusty side of the deck house aft. A hole sizzled into its wall, the metal reddening about it, smoking an acid stink into the air. Sai swore and dipped the pistol. "Where the hell's the focus?" she yelled at the pistol, as if it were the pistol's fault. "It has to be wider." The pistol was a Chang Mark 7, an advanced version of the Mark 4 she'd used in her limited small arms training and not familiar to her. She fumbled to get a proper grip, much preferring a starship's weaponry system, the rough beauty of the neutron torpedoes, the glittering mirrors of the main lasers, the mental feed of it as she sat at fire control, the ease of response, the big power of it all. With the focus finally found and open to its widest, she raised the pistol again, grinning, determined to give the watchers something to watch, and vaporize the entire deckhouse. "Silene!" She dropped into a combat crouch, looking left and right. "Who's there?" "Silene, you stop that at once!" A gaunt face, white and bloodless, swam out of the darkness of a window in the deckhouse. Its mouth opened and shut, out of sync with its howling words. "Did I bring you into the world to be a common vandal?" Sai stared back at it, recognition crashing in on her. "Mother? Don't you mother me, young lady. I meant you for higher things than this. Good God, Sai, after all the time you should know better than to—" The words faded into a sort of jar, jar, jar as the gaunt white face pulled back into the dark in odd little jerks. "Mother?" Sai whispered, her mind awhirl. She raced to the deckhouse, its wall still hot and smoldering, and brandishing her laser peered through its open door at the dim emptiness within. "Who's there?" The fright in her voice was loud and brittle as she stood at the threshold, unwilling to step inside. A moment more and she was retreating down ladders and scurrying back through dim interiors to the hull breach and gladly onto the sunlit plain. Saida Gurch, who would go into battle with a happiness she hated, had become afraid of the dark. Chapter 5. All the hulks seemed to be cantered towards her as she passed. She walked, avoiding their shadows, as if they were solid obstructions. Nothing moved on their decks. No ghosts watched from their dark portholes, though she was sure the ghosts were there. She would go tomorrow, continue her journey to the Charlie Sierra cairn tomorrow. She was physically well enough now, even if her mind was still cracked wide open. She'd not miss this vast plain with its haunted wrecks, she decided. What she could do with right now, in her twitchy state of nerves, was a dose of caffeine. Coffee. That was something she did miss. She stopped and closed her eyes, trying to remember the aroma and taste of a mug of dark arabesque, hot from Utopia Plains galley. She hadn't tasted coffee of any bean since she'd made a brew for George and herself in the shuttle. No, not even then. Oh, some piece of space junk won't come within 100,000 K, she'd said with all the certainty of someone making a ghastly mistake. She'd kicked back in the shuttle's jump seat. "Got any coffee?" "There's a little galley at the back of the cabin." George started to unclip his seatbelt. Sai stopped him. "Let me do it. Officers need some reason for existing." She unclipped and did a backflip out of her seat, floating herself across to the food locker and cooker jammed into an obscure aft corner, and began juggling essence tubes and mugs, one of them marked George, with mouthpieces attached to their covers, the only way to safely drink in freefall. "How do you like it?" "Strong, thanks, Sai. White. semi-sweet. Yeah, me too. Oh, by the way, there's some chocolate in my vac suit bag. That's all right. I'll pass. It's Earth chocolate, George. I saved it from McMurdo Sound. Oh, well, in that case, thanks. You're not alone. I think Martian chocolate's crap, too. He laughed and said, Are you all right there? Fine. I've worked a kitchen in Micro-G 100 times before, back home whenever the artificial gravity kicked out. Micro-G? On Mars? On Phobos. You're a spud? Spud? She glanced over her shoulder. Sorry, no offense. None taken. Cy waved an arm dismissively and knocked a hovering milk tube spinning. You just caught me by surprise. Haven't been called a spud in years. No, we don't miss the name. Sort of proud of it, I suppose. It's what comes from living on a moon that looks like a 28-kilometer-long potato. She went back to jetting water into the 2 mugs. Not that I've ever seen a real potato. You've not missed anything. George picked up Cy's vac suit pack, rummaging past gloves and the soft helmet in search of Earth chocolate. They're overrated and starchy. Have you been to Phobos? Only the once. Where, Stickney? No, Hall, the freight depot. My father used to work there. Hall's the industrial end. Stickney Crater is the suburban end. If you have to live on a rock, live on the best bit. Cy? Can't find the chocolate? She turned to see he already had the chocolate out, but had left it floating in midair. He was studying the scan again. That piece of space junk just altered towards us by 6 degrees. Cy secured the mugs to a stay-put and, kicking against the rear wall, floated herself back to look over his shoulder. Has your autopilot used the drive to correct course? Gravity flux can affect nickel-iron meteors in freakish ways. Negative, ma'am. We're steady on course and the drive is locked down in standby mode. His return to formal address highlighted Cy's growing concern over the contact. She somersaulted into her seat and buckled in. Range? 1.3 million kilometers. When will your sensors be able to give a positive ID? Even as she spoke, she saw the image on the scan make another minor alteration towards them. At about 1 million. Though the scan still didn't know what it was yet, Cy had an idea that she did. George, does this craft have any weapons? It does not. Well, apart from a hand laser and my panic bag. Panic bag? An emergency pack stowed under my seat in case I ever have to bail out. Okay. Can you crank any more speed out of the drive? Not really. The mass-to-power ratio is just about even. Cy looked again at the little white dot on the scan, and suspicion became cold certainty. At the same moment, contact ID came up on the pilot console, so that George said to Cy, and Cy said to George, Xenoid pod ship! Cy's ghosts are catching up with her, and a familiar streak of sky promises an interruption to her solitude. Perhaps a welcome one. As we've seen, Cy remains conflicted about completely severing ties with her military past. Which instinct will take over? Castaway and deserter? Or genetically engineered soldier? Join us next week to find out. We love bringing you the best audio fiction week after week, but we can't do it without your support. Your donations pay our authors, our narrators, our servers, and our staff. Please consider supporting us with a monthly donation through either PayPal or Patreon. You can also review us on iTunes, request us on Spotify, and consider the stories we publish for award consideration. There are lots of ways you can help. Join the discussion on the EA Forum, forum.escapeartists.net, or come visit us on Twitter at Cast of Wonders. Cast of Wonders is a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and is brought to you by the creative team of assistant editors Catherine Inskip and Alexis Goebel. Our associate editors are Tonya Bezpalko, Amy Brennan, Alicia Caporaso, Trace Von Teal, William Heitminer, Andrew K. Ho, Sean Proctor, Ray O, Susie Rodriguez, Carissa Sluss, Emma Smales, and Chris Tang. Our audio producer is Jeremy Carter. Our community manager is Danny Daly. And I remain, as always, your humble editor and host, Marguerite Kenner. Our episodes are released under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can download or listen to the episode on any device you like for free, but you can't change it or sell it. Our theme music, Appeal to Heavens, is by Alexei Nov and available from Promo DJ or his Facebook page. Thanks for listening.